are delighted to have a great panel for the next portion of the meeting. And I'm going to introduce our moderator, Dr. Elizabeth Cox-Brand, who has spent 20 plus years in higher education in various student services positions at universities and community colleges. After she completed her doctorate at Iowa State, she moved to be the assistant director of the California Community College Collaborative at UC Riverside. She came to Oregon in 2011 to work as the director of research and communications at CCWD, and then in August 2014 moved to the Oregon Community College Association so that she could focus all of her efforts on student success, and she is the Student Success and Assessment Director. So I'll turn it over to Elizabeth.
Show me the path on that. I know. Thank you, Mary. So we were just laughing up here a little bit because I said I couldn't draw my pathway to how I got to where I am, but I was a humanities major, so yay liberal arts. So as Mary said, my name's Elizabeth, and I'm going to be moderating today. Those of you who know me know that I'm very informal, so this is going to be a rather informal moderation. I'm just going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and then they've prepared a short overview in response to what Dave has talked with us about this morning. So I also wanted to just say that Dr. Lisa Avery, down on the end, no, she's not Ben Cannon, but she may be shorter than Ben Cannon, but she is mighty. So she has decided to jump up and pinch hit for us, so please be nice to her. And be nice to Janeen and Caroline too, please. So Janeen, would you like to start?
Sure. Hello. Hi. I'm Janeen Hull, and I am I'm faculty at Portland Community College in physical education. Woohoo! Nobody else in physical education out there, I bet. Happens to me every time we do these things. And I also am fortunate enough to work in our CTE programs, too, with our Fitness Technology Exercise Science Department. So I have a perspective of kind of both. And I've served on our Degrees and Certificates Committee and currently have chaired the committee for the last 3 years. So that's kind of how I got into these conversations. And how I ended up here is a big mystery. I am way out of my element. In many ways, I'm actually wearing heels and a skirt. Usually I'm in a ponytail, sweaty. I'm so out of my element right now, it's not even funny. But I thought I would start just by giving you a brief overview of PCC. And do you want us to do that now or introduce everybody? Sure. Brief overview of PCC and then kind of where we are in the conversation, so that gives you some context. So I will try to do this. A little bit about PCC. Okay, so we are a large community college in the Portland metro area. Actually, we are 4 comprehensive campuses, all under one accreditation, and we're spread throughout the area and serve the population and the demographics of the community where the schools sit. That's pretty fair to say. We actually are pretty large in the fact that we have, the head count is 60,000 credit students, with that being really a little over 30,000 FTE. And faculty-wide, we're looking at about 400 full-time faculty and about 1,500 part-time faculty. So just in size and scope, some of the things when we want to make a change or we're thinking about doing something different, that can be a stumbling block in and of itself just from that aspect. But how we got to, well, I guess I should also say, like, how does it break down for us with student population of those FTE? We're thinking it's about 50% of our students intend to transfer. And our transfer institution of choice by far is Portland State for students in the Portland metro area. And the other 50% of our students breaks down into about 30% for CTE and 20% Dev Ed. So that's kind of our general landscape. In our CTE programs, we're looking at about 50 programs with a wide variety of certificates and degrees and career pathway certificates. So we are familiar with the pathway, as all of you are here in Oregon. We just tend to do it really well on the CTE side of house and haven't really figured out how to do that quite the same way on the transfer side of house. So you might be in some of the similar situations. A little bit about how we got to this conversation. We had our big accreditation last spring. It went well, it was great. But we were starting to talk about Gen Ed. And really it started with assessment. Our core outcomes. How are we assessing them? Are we authentically assessing them? Or are we just like getting it done because it has to get done because faculty do what faculty do? are we doing it intentional? Is it working for students? Is it a benefit? And so that led to the conversation of, could we assess using our gen ed? Well, maybe we, like many colleges out there, have the traditional distribution model of gen ed with, get this, close to 400 courses of gen ed. So we weren't really sure, depending on what gen ed you took, maybe you were meeting the core outcomes, but maybe not, right? Depends on how you kind of did your little candy box distribution model. So we were like, okay, is that effective? Are we doing that right? Should we relook at that? And we had colleagues going in and having the conversation about gen ed and how it could be redesigned as a program. And we were all like, what? A program? Gen ed? Never thought about it that way. And so that was kind of exciting to think, how could we redo gen ed? And then we said, oh, we could assess the core outcomes. And then we went, wait, are these the right core outcomes? Who made these core outcomes? How long have they been in existence? Where did these come from? So we're looking at core outcomes, gen ed, and then over the summer, Oregon administrative rule kind of allowed then for community colleges in Oregon to have majors. So at first everybody was like, woohoo, because anything you can't do, you immediately want to do, right? But then we went, wait, is that going to be the most benefit to the student? What does that mean? What would that look like at PCC? How would we do that effectively? And most of the nation have had majors, and the success rates are not that great for transfer for that group. So how can we make this better? So then we were like, okay, let's look at core outcomes, gen ed, and majors. And then the book came out. And everybody started reading the book and going, pathways, maybe pathways. Wait, is it meta major or is it a pathway? Or is it meta major and pathway are the structure and then we end up with a major on the transcript? How does this work? And so that's kind of where we are and how we are here today. Thank you. And I was really hoping to be in the audience to ask that question to someone on the panel who was much more prepared to answer that than I.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm a little bit more formal, I think. So I'm also a philosopher, and so I've done what philosophers do, and I've written a little something, which I would like to read for you today. So, but my name is Caroline Lundquist, and I work here at Lane teaching critical thinking and ethics. And I just want to thank everyone so much for being here. This is really, really an honor and privilege to be up here and to be in a conversation with all of you. So thank you. And now I will begin. All right. Last summer, I had the privilege of participating in a faculty interest group, or FIG, here at Lane, in which colleagues and I read and critically assessed Redesigning America's Community Colleges. For me, this was an especially meaningful experience because it represented an opportunity to take seriously what the philosopher Albert Borgman has called Churchill's principle, namely, we shape our buildings, and afterwards, our buildings shape us. Churchill's principle is useful in part because it reminds us, as Borgman notes, quote, that the individual does not shape buildings. We do it together after disagreements, discussions, compromises, and decisions. The principle extends not only to the design and construction of physical spaces, but also, more importantly, to the design and construction of our institutions. In short, it claims that through our collective decisions and actions, we transform our shared world, and that world, in turn, transforms us. Every stakeholder plays a role in this process, but more often than not, we play our roles unknowingly by sustaining through our inaction institutional structures that do us more harm than good, or that do us less good than they might. I believe that where we find that our institutions are not what they should be, we must take responsibility for the roles that we play in sustaining them in their imperfection. More importantly, we must imagine the roles we could play in reshaping them. Lane, like every community college, is a complex institution, and we mustn't forget that we are its constituent parts. As such, we have a responsibility to critically assess it and the roles that we do play in sustaining it and might play in reshaping it. This process of critical assessment begins as soon as we become conscious of the ways in which its design meaningfully shapes the experiences of its stakeholders for better and sometimes for worse. Although my FIG colleagues and I agreed with many of the basic claims set forth in Redesigning America's Community Colleges, we disagreed with the authors and amongst ourselves regarding numerous particulars. Perhaps more importantly, we generated many, many questions. I want to share a few of our observations, and especially to make salient those moments where we recognized in lane structure signs of what Jenkins and his colleagues have termed the cafeteria model of college design. I also want to turn your attention to some of the concerns that arise quite naturally in response to the guided pathways model and that members of the lane community have expressed. For me and for my colleagues at the FIG, reading this book was a wake-up call. It gave us a new way to make sense of our experiences at Lane, experiences that most of us had previously understood to be merely subjective. And it did so by helping us to identify the systemic causes of the joys and frustrations we had all experienced. We realized that here at Lane, as is so often the case, the personal is institutional. Our subjective experiences were not arising randomly, but instead followed a predictable pattern resulting from certain features of this institution's design. My colleagues and I laughed cathartically when it dawned on us that Lane's physical campus was an apt metaphor for the institution itself. As beautiful, innovative, and thought-provoking as it is disjointed, frustrating, and alienating. We talked about feeling lost and disconnected, physically lost when trying to navigate the campus, metaphorically lost when trying to navigate the institution, physically disconnected from important resources and metaphorically disconnected from our colleagues, especially those in different divisions, from administrators, and from the Lane community. It did not take us long to realize that so many of our negative experiences of working here, so many of our daily stresses and frustrations were the effects of design features that reflect a cafeteria model. It later occurred to me that those places where Lane is strongest as an institution, by virtue of which it inspires feelings of joy, of engagement, of meaningfulness in work and learning, are just those places where it approximates, whether by chance or by design, some aspect of the guided pathways model. In most of the areas we analyzed, which included developmental education, counseling and advising, faculty professional development, curricular coherence, curricular articulation, academic and other student support services, and pedagogical models, Lane generally seemed to fall somewhere in between the cafeteria model and the guided pathways model, erring, I think, on the side of the former. In my view, is that an understatement? It is, okay. In my view, faculty professional development and the scholarship of teaching and learning both exemplify Lane's present orientation, and so I want to say a word on each. Faculty professional development is a key component of the guided pathways model, and with good reason, because as many of us know, when it is designed well, it is one of the best and most rewarding ways to improve the quality of one's work, and especially one's teaching, I believe. It is also something that many faculty at Lane value tremendously, and I'm sure that some of you here have benefited from remarkable programs like Faculty Connections, Teaching Squares. Can I just see hands from people who've participated in these? New Dimensions, right? From academic colloquia, from FIGs like the one that led to this very event, right? Good. It seems to me that faculty professional development is something that this institution is deeply committed to, but that FPD also seems to fit to a disconcerting extent the cafeteria model. As Jenkins and his colleagues write, under the cafeteria model, professional development consists of, quote, a series of loosely related activities that administrators hope will improve teaching and learning. Now, I do not want to diminish in any way the important work that FPD offerings do for our community. But as my FIG colleagues and I noted, many faculty members here are unaware that these offerings exist and learn about them by chance, as I did, by the way. And there are few enough participants, often just 10 or 15 in a given workshop, and they seem to be the same participants. And many or most seem to be part-time faculty. Now, that last part is not necessarily a bad thing, but we need to be aware of that. These are educators who are devoted to excellence in teaching, but here there is a problematic irony. As Jenkins and his colleagues note, there is a self-selection process at work here, such that the faculty who are least in need of professional development are generally the first to seek it out, and the faculty who are most in need of that development are the last. Moreover, although these programs are beneficial to their participants in numerous ways, they are so largely in the short term. When they end, so too do many of the practices they initially inspire and so many of the connections among faculty participants that they create. This, too, is in keeping with the cafeteria model. Quote, workshops are typically unaccompanied by structures to help faculty sustain and build on their learning across time. I get a lump in my throat when I recall the last day of a New Dimensions workshop. This is a workshop on teaching, excellence in teaching. So many of us there expressed a feeling that the workshop should continue indefinitely. We asked why there wasn't a permanent space and a regular time for us to come together and talk about teaching. As Jenkins and his colleagues note, compounding the problems of the cafeteria college's typical professional development model is its culture of isolation. And I love that concept, culture of isolation. This culture is problematic in part because it lends itself to a knowledge transmission approach to education. Why? Because other more effective approaches are more difficult to master and as such are likely to require substantial institutional support. For those unfamiliar with the knowledge transmission approach, I would like to summarize. Step 1, students open heads. Step 2, instructors dump in terminology. Step 3, students repeat terminology. Step 4, students pass classes. Via this model, which my colleagues in science education lovingly refer to as stamp collecting, little or no deep conceptual learning takes place. There are faculty here who resist this trend, who work consciously and tirelessly to research the most effective pedagogical innovations in their disciplines, who try them out in their classrooms to discover through a process of inquiry the teaching methods that best serve their students. But they do so in isolation, or at best in isolated pockets, and with little or no support from the institution. Some faculty members are working to change that. Sarah Lucia, who spoke earlier, advocated for and helped to secure a space for faculty to meet, to research and discuss teaching and learning. And as some of you here know, Dennis Gilbert, who spoke very eloquently earlier, has been coordinating projects aimed at creating a permanent infrastructure that would sustain the scholarship of teaching and learning here at Lane beyond the tenure of any of us who happen to be pursuing it now. Sarah and Dennis are great examples of how devoted faculty members can transform through their efforts the culture of an institution. As Borgman points out, and as their work illustrates, we can usually find ways to flourish within a poorly designed system, provided we are prepared to go to heroic lengths. But we should not have to. Not when we can work together to design institutions that make it so much easier for everyone to flourish and in which it is so much more enjoyable to do the work that we want to do in the way that we ought to do it. So where is Lane now on the continuum between cafeteria and guided pathways? I think we may be close to the middle. A perfect vantage point from which to consider new possibilities and to reconsider old choices. If we are closer to the cafeteria, we seem at least to be looking in the direction of the guided pathways. My evidence for this? Lane already manifests so many of the values that enliven the guided pathways model. A genuine desire to see all of our students flourish, a passion for excellence in scholarship and teaching, devotion to the local community, an emphasis on practical problem solving, and an ameliorative or growth mindset. What it may lack is the organizational structure that would allow these values to do all of the work, the practical, meaningful work that they could be doing more by design. I think my mic just went out. Thank you. More by design and less by chance or as a result of the heroic efforts of a few outstanding employees. Certainly, the guided pathways model presents opportunities for our college, as it does for community colleges across the country. But it also undeniably presents challenges. When my FIG colleagues and I recommended that administrators at Lane read and consider the arguments from Redesigning America's Community Colleges, and when we asked them to help us to spread awareness of the guided pathways approach, is this not working either? It seems quiet. Is that okay? Sorry. Our intention was not to endorse the approach, but instead to spark a lively conversation about how or to what extent the arguments put forth in the book might be useful to our college community. In my view, questions, reasoned reservations, and reasoned resistance are an essential part of that discussion, and that is why I felt compelled to make available to you all a series of concerns that our faculty and staff members have raised over the possible implementation of a guided pathways model here at Lane. All right, these questions came from us, but I want to make clear that they are not for us alone. They're for the stakeholders of any community college that is considering adopting a guided pathways model. And I want to thank my colleagues who, it's off now?
Could you hold it closer?
Yes, I can. Thank you. I want to thank my colleagues who helped to generate these concerns, and I want to thank all of you in advance for giving them your consideration and for sharing your responses in what I'm sure is going to be a very lively and incredibly enlightening conversation. So thank you all very much. And by the way, the questions and comments I'm referring to are on handouts that should be on your table. Some of them are white, some are yellow, and there are extra copies up here and in the back if anyone needs one. So thank you all very much.
I see perhaps why Ben Cannon decided he couldn't get to this panel. These are very tough acts to follow. The good thing about stepping in at the last minute is I didn't lose sleep last night over whether or not I had made all of the right preparations, but I think many of us spend a lot of time in meetings and are able to sometimes multitask, and hopefully I've been able to put that to good use. But my name is Lisa Avery, as was mentioned, and I am new to Oregon and to Portland. I started July 1st as the campus president at PCC Sylvania and really began my career in the classroom. So I have 10 years of full-time faculty instruction, and I think I view everything through that lens. And so it's important to say that at the beginning of this. Sylvania is the oldest and largest of the campuses at PCC, and where I actually came from and starting at Oregon was the Washington system. And interestingly, in Washington, there's performance-based funding. It's an achieving the dream state, a lot of Gates money, and the strings that come attached to Gates money. So I think we've been hearing parts of this conversation just north of the state line for a while. And I am wanting to talk a little bit today about the national conversation. I'm a member of the inaugural commission that AACC, the American Association of Community Colleges, has a new commission on guided pathways, and it's chaired by some really heavy hitters, so it lets us know that this is an important conversation. But Brenda Hellier from San Jacinto Community College in Texas is one of the chairs. Gretchen Schmidt from Jobs for the Future and Kay McClenny are also really important staff to the committee. And it's interesting, I think I may be one of the only folks representing the Northwest there. And there are schools that are large and small, urban and rural, and states from all over the country. I think about 15 of us on this commission. We've learned some from our colleagues in Tennessee, and also folks in Hawaii who have had good progress. We keep wishing that our next meeting would be there, but we've not had any luck yet. And a few takeaways, and then what we've learned so far. But I think, first off, it's not one size fits all. And that's really, really important. And community colleges, more than any other educational institutions, are embedded in our communities. So one size doesn't fit all, even in one state. What happens in Portland, I assume, will look quite different than Lane or Umpqua, for instance. We're learning from each other, trying to use data, but to interpret those data very carefully to make sure that they were collected and can be applied well at our own schools. So again, it has to be a local and a regional effort to make this work, I think. And we know some of the data, and I won't go through a lot of those, but I think an important stat that I latched onto early on is that about, and Davis, you may have to fact check me here, but I think about 70% of degree-seeking community college students who are in unspecified general studies fields make very little progress toward a degree. And in fact, fewer than a handful of them, percentage-wise, ever earn a baccalaureate degree. And that's degree seekers. I really want to emphasize I think in the beginning of the community college movement, where we really serve womb to tomb, right? Cradle to grave, we provide services, early childhood, all the way through senior enrichment. And in being all things to all people, perhaps we've offered too many choices on the transfer spectrum and not served transfer students as well as we could have. So I think an important principle of this is there still are choices. It's a pathway, not a prison. Okay, it's a pathway, not a prison. If you take away nothing else today, we have to make sure that people know that. Students still have a lot of room for choices in schools that have been successful with Pathways programs, but yet we really need to, in being all things to all people, there are so many choices that it can be bewildering to students at times. And I can echo this in my own personal life. I am, how many of you are Costco shoppers? Okay. A couple people have a membership. I get a lot back on my 2% per year. Part of the reason I think that I have paid a lot of my salary to Costco over the years is they've made good choices on my behalf before I get confused and hungry in, say, the peanut butter aisle. Okay, if you go to Safeway or Fred Meyer, there are like 15 kinds of peanut butter, right? Am I the only one who likes peanut butter here? Like, yeah, come on. Okay, it's got sugar, it's got protein, let's go, right? So when you get to that, at Safeway, there's like every kind. There's probably gluten-free, sugar-free, organic, the kind you have to stir and refrigerate, creamy, crunchy, etc. Costco's got like 3, okay? When I go to Safeway and I stand and I stare at those 15 choices, I leave with jelly and bread and no peanut butter. Because I got overwhelmed by the bewildering array of options. And if you read some of the Achieving the Dream data, the bewildering array of choices facing our students, there are too many choices. They've got a lot of competing life demands. They're just trying to fill one of the buckets. And if you look at the website, and PCCs is certainly nothing to brag about when we look at the degree transfer plans, it's overwhelming to them. They don't get peanut butter or possibly jelly or bread because they make choices that we think are well-informed, but it's often about how cheap is the book, when is the class, can I get a bus that gets me there on time? Not necessarily the well-rounded critical thinker that we all really, really want. So coming back and away from, you can tell it's almost lunchtime. I think it's important for us to think about Pathways as not another innovation. And I know, especially, I was kind of picking on my neighbors to the north in Washington. They feel innovationed out, especially being in a heavily Gates-funded state. A lot of different things that you have to do each year. Faculty and student service professionals feel like it's just another thing to add on to what else I'm already doing. I don't see a Pathways model that way. But it's more daunting almost than an initiative because it's a different way of doing business. And in fact, I think on the student development side of the house, it's almost it's almost, instead of tinkering with how we do things, it's rebuilding. And that's, to me, what is really, really daunting. Looking at those websites, thinking about things like, how do we schedule rooms? How do we assign classes? How do we do budgeting? Well, usually we just do what we did last year. We tinker with it a little, and then throw that same Excel spreadsheet into something that becomes a class students take. This can't work that way. Guided Pathways can't work with just tinkering. It's really a wholesale revamping of the way that we do business. And I think that part, it's exciting, but it's also a daunting challenge to us because it means that there are a lot of things we have to consider doing differently. And I think in higher ed, that hasn't always been our strength. Can I say that nicely? I'm new to the state, so I'm not going to pick on Oregon. I can say in the other states I've worked, that hasn't been a strength. And we have a lot of people who would have to their workday would look different. The information systems we're using, financial aid, all of those things would have to change rather dramatically. But the external pressures are very, very strong to do so. So a couple of other pieces. Again, revamping web design. The way that we assign classrooms, the really, really nuts and bolts stuff. I think that we can't just have board members, cabinet members, and presidents sitting in a room coming out with this and saying, okay, make this happen, let's get it done by fall, without realizing that those nuts and bolts are so crucial and critical to the way that we do business. And in fact, that a lot of those things are there for a reason. So getting everybody involved and making this really a college-wide effort is going to, I think, make it much more successful. In the models that I've looked at in other states, that has been the case. And it's taken a long time, but people have felt like they're changing the way that they do business, and students are benefiting as a result. And we are getting, if we can do this right, we will serve students better and have those well-rounded, globally educated students with strong liberal arts and humanities. I'm from social sciences. I believe in the social science, liberal arts student as a valid person. I mean, look at the news and the election, right? We need students to understand history, okay? Without saying much more. We need students to understand history. But what we need to help them with is streamlining the choices that are facing them, and to also take into context what their life circumstances often are, things like financial aid, housing, hunger. All of that has to be a part of our model, so the student development side is very, very important, but it comes back to learning. It needs to start and finish with learning, and make sure that the experience between students and faculty, and the way that faculty decide exactly what is it, what does that globally educated student look like? What are the core outcomes that we want from, say, a social science pre-major, however we might title these things. And the hard part, I think, with faculty, and I was an instructor for a long, long time, and in the process, sometimes I got bored of teaching what I was teaching and came up with a new elective and got it through the curriculum committee and felt very proud about it, and I got to teach that elective. Looking back, I would assume that as those schools get a little bit more focused on degree and time to completion, some of the questions are not, did she want to teach that, but did students need to learn that? And that's a hard conversation to have. But if it's really focused on outcomes and creating the right kinds of experiences for students and the outcomes that faculty believe that they need, and it's based in the discipline, I think we can get there. It's just going to be a very interesting dialogue. Thank you.
So I just have a few questions that I'd like to throw to the panel, and then we're going to open it up to the floor and invite Davis to also be, he's like, no, to also be responding to some of the questions.
We're looking for co-authors for our next book, and I think we found them.
I think so. I think so. I still contend that the best thing I ever did in my whole educational career was take improv. That has got to be the best thing ever. So you learn to think on your feet, and by gosh, it comes in handy. Thank you, Lisa, for this. So I've been doing some reading recently, and I found a quote that I think is rather, it's kind of funny, but it's kind of not, so bear with me. It comes from our colleagues at Cuyahoga Community College, and it's talking about the current system. And it says, our current education system is similar to a wealthy patriarch who's brain dead and has a complete system failure but is kept on life support. He's no longer functional or productive, but because so many people depend on him and have a special interest in his survival, no one's willing to pull the plug. Right? And then we those of us who were at the Student Success and Retention Conference earlier this month heard another wonderful reformer in education, Terry O'Banion. And Terry calls the current architecture of education a permanent barrier to any change and reform. So we're talking about big things, and I think Lisa touched on this a little bit, as did Caroline. So the last thing that I'll throw at you for this comment, in Jamie Mirasota's new book about America Needs Talent, he says that the idea that decisions in funding and policies should primarily respond to needs of colleges and universities is no longer appropriate, if it ever was. It must be replaced by a focus on meeting the needs of students. So if you could just give your thoughts on the Pathways model and how you think that that may help us to restructure our institutions so that we can have more of a focus on students. And whoever would like to go.
I can jump in if go for it.
Please do.
Well, I guess I'm pragmatic about this to a certain extent. I would rather that we set the agenda and make these decisions ourselves than have them imposed upon us from outside, first off. So I think that we know better what our students need. We haven't made every perfect decision going along, but I think it was all well intended. I mean, people are passionate about what they teach and what they want students to learn. So that's one element. I think that it's important to consider what the external pressures look like, but also borrowing, if we can, from our success and our colleagues have had in career technical education. If you look at our graduation rates, as paltry as they are on the liberal arts transfer side, many of our CTE programs have great graduation data. Time to degree, the outcomes, those things are all kind of locked in. If we could take some of the best of those elements, and I think there are a lot of pilot projects throughout, probably even the state, but certainly nationwide, that do that. But borrowing from those and imposing some of the CTE model when it's effective on transfer students, I think would serve us very, very well and serve them well. No other takers?
Grab this one if you want, Janeen.
I'll echo that. I agree. I was actually just talking to Dr. Jenkins and saying that I think in Oregon, our career pathways, like we have them, our CTE programs, we kind of do this. We have embedded advising. They're with a cohort. They have other like-minded students. There is a path. They can earn a certificate, go out, work, come back. There's a pathway back in if they need to do that, or earn a certificate to get a good part-time job as they continue on. Where it gets a little muddy for them is with the terminal degree, right? There either has to be articulation agreements and it's not quite as easy to transfer. But if we could work with that and build off that model, that is a good base for a career pathway, for our transfer students. It's our transfer students who probably don't get as many touches or connections with faculty, don't have a lot of the like-minded students in their gen ed courses. There's not as much integrative learning in that aspect.
Go for it.
Exactly what I'm going to say. I'll figure it out.
There you go.
Well, I want to say thank you for the question, first of all, because one thing that's interesting to me and really striking is how often we lose sight of the fact that we all exist for the sake of our students. There would be no faculty if there were no students. There would be no administrators if there were no faculty and no students. So that's the telos, that's the end, that's the for the sake of which. I think that instruction matters tremendously, and I also think that teaching is one of the hardest jobs on the planet, perhaps the hardest job. I mentioned faculty professional development and the scholarship of teaching and learning, and these are also mentioned in the book, which I really appreciated. For me, those have to be focuses because we have so many well-intentioned young teachers starting their careers coming here, and there's an increasing reliance on part-time and adjunct faculty, so we see less experienced people coming into our institutions. They need help. You know, what's so funny about many graduate programs is the folks who go through them are not taught how to teach. Right. It's a different skill set, right? And we need to be doing that teaching here for our faculty members so they can better serve their students, right? So we can better serve our students.
Along that line, my favorite thing to say is that I teach in doctoral courses, but I cannot teach kindergarten because I don't know how to really teach. I've never had any pedagogical training or methodology. I think I had one curriculum class in my doctoral program. But yeah, I can teach other people how to be teachers. That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Staying on the line of the cafeteria college and just talking about all the courses and things that we offer at the community college, as I was reading in some of the books, it's saying that our current curriculum is like a food court and a smorgasbord of disconnected pieces of knowledge. So how do you feel that the guided pathways can help address that? Do you agree? What kinds of comments would you have about that?
Yeah. So there was some reference to learning outcomes, and that's something that Lane is beginning to take very seriously. And the idea here is that we could introduce a kind of curricular coherence by having some basic goals, things like helping students to learn critical thinking skills or to learn how to be engaged in their communities and with each other and with material and so on and so forth. I think that this is an intriguing possibility, but I think it also has to be executed very, very carefully because here's the risk. And honestly, I think this is the way that our core learning outcomes feel to a lot of people now. I think they feel initially like jargon. They have to become deeply meaningful, and we all have to understand, we have to have a shared conceptual understanding of what they mean. Now, there are ways to achieve that. In fact, I'm working on a project right now in our division in social science to try to figure out what it is we mean when we say critical thinking, right? Are we all talking about the same thing, right? We need a nuanced, sophisticated understanding of that so we can make that meaningful and build it into our curriculum rather than paying lip service to the idea by saying, oh yes, well I have an activity where students discuss opinions, therefore, there it is, done, right? We need a robust shared conception of learning outcomes if we're going to use them as the way to get a kind of curricular coherence.
I think you're right. And building on that, and this will look different at all 17 colleges in the state, it's about program maps, clear, coherent program maps, and helping in student development and in academic affairs, drawing those lines and those connections for students so that they understand this isn't just some disjointed series of courses that happen to be offered at the time they wanted it with a book that they could afford, right? But rather a purposeful set of outcomes and making sure that students have some help choosing a pathway. We know that making a choice early on is very, very helpful, that students who get connected to a discipline, to a department, to a faculty mentor, the sooner that that happens, the more likely they are to complete, and to complete with full credit transfer, which is really what we want from a social justice perspective. We also want to sell this to the 4 years. There is no reason for them to repeat these courses. They've gotten a great education here at our colleges, and we want that to be a full credit transfer. But to have students make the most of that experience, we need to draw those connections for them and show how things connect. I think that for us in our committees, in our bureaucracy, in our curricular work, we might get it. But we have to really put that out there for students and make it much, much clearer what the alignments are, how it connects to transfer, how it might connect to workforce, and help them choose a pathway and stay on it, but also that there are escape clauses if it's not something that's working for them, and make sure that they're learning. So it's a tall order. But I think if it starts and finishes with learning, and we're drawing those pathways for them and making it very, very clear. This isn't some secret that's somewhere on a super small script at the bottom of our webpage, but boom, it's out there. This is what we believe. This is what we have decided that you should learn in the meta majors, or however we might title them. And here's why. And here's how it connects to your transfer institutions. And the transfer institutions are a really meaningful part of the conversation.
I want to make clear that the maps are really a heuristic. They are not the end-all. They're a framework for these discussions about how programs fit together and align with employer and university requirements, but then fundamentally how to have discussions about learning across programs. If you just have the maps, you got nothing without these discussions.
And I think that's part of the challenge that we face, is that, especially with our political friends, who like to have things quick. We want this to happen, and we want to see results quickly, and it takes time.
You know, I talk to a lot of legislators, and even on the right, and I go to many red states, they want to hear from the faculty because they're getting these complaints from, and they're looking, they're not looking at our websites, but this incoherence that students are experiencing gets communicated to them. My credits wouldn't transfer. That pisses them off. Even progressives, especially because we know who suffers the most from credits not transferring, for example. So I think, and I was talking to the Texas two-year colleges Teachers Association from all the colleges, and I said, even you guys got to step up, because even in Texas, where you have very conservative legislatures, they're saying, we want to hear from the faculty. You guys are the educators, but if you don't, they're going to do stuff, and it ain't going to be good. It's going to be bad for students and for teaching.
And so on that line, I've read that the largest challenge in the completion agenda and all this work that we're doing is engaging the faculty, and that the faculty absolutely have to be engaged if we're going to have any success in this. So I'm pleased to have 3 faculty, well, 1 former faculty, 1 recovering faculty up here, so that you can talk to us, for the administrators and the rest of us that are out here trying to figure out how do we best engage our faculty to be having these conversations and to get involved with this movement.
We're here. No, I understand what you're saying. So at PCC, being spread out, being larger, having as all of you, many of our classes taught by part-time faculty, it is challenging to engage and get good consensus and get everybody on board, to let everybody know what all of the amazing things that are going on around the college. And I think that is one of our challenges, to have good communication and to engage faculty into the bigger picture beyond just their silo, their class, this is what I need to do today, because we know they're passionate about that and they're staying on task with their content and with their topic. But to look bigger, to see you're a part of higher ed and you're helping to shape how it looks and how it benefits students. That is, just trying to find the bandwidth to make sure that we do that and do that well.
And I should have said this, but I think you touched on it, Caroline, when you mentioned the FIG. And when we have events and things, and it seems to be the same 10 people who show up, or the same 10 people who will volunteer to do whatever. So particularly, how do we expand that pool so that we get more people who would be involved?
Well, this is such an important question, and I want to point out that I'm a part-timer here. I'm one of those people who usually feels disenfranchised, and have, by the way, in the past. And so I think it's really, really important, first of all, to speak to faculty members who feel disenfranchised, and to say, you are a part of this too. In fact, you may be the really important part right now, right? I think sometimes a personal invitation is what it takes. By the way, I mean, I participated in the FIG because I was personally invited to do so, right? And look what it's led to, right? So I think that there's a lot of sort of just groundwork that can take place, a lot of going around. I like something Aristotle says. He says that a single opinion is a thing of very little weight. We just dismiss it. But when you put together a lot of opinions, it's a thing of very serious weight, very serious. And so if you can start with just a few opinions here and there and encourage faculty to share them, to have these discussions together, and then begin to introduce some kind of structure with events like this one, I think that would be the way to do it. But I won't pretend that it's easy. And sometimes maybe it happens sort of spontaneously. But I think that the time is right to be having these conversations. And so it may go better than one might think, right? It may.
I'm an optimist.
Well, first off, Caroline, Portland Community College is hiring a number of full-time positions. I am an administrator, so I've gone to the dark side. I have to be pragmatic. I hope she has her CV with her. I'm just teasing. Let me talk first, and I hope this isn't your next question, both about the role of leadership and the role of faculty. I think the role of administrators is to set a vision, find the resources, and get out of the way. Check back in and make sure that the vision that is that faculty are working this out. But to really figure out, to get faculty into the right groups, where first I think I see it as in the department, in their own departments and disciplines. So for history folks, to come up with what are the core outcomes for a social science pre-major. And then to work so within history, then across into social sciences. But also I see that there has to be some sort of college-wide curricular discussion, because we want that cohesive whole in addition to the parts, and having a systems theory approach to that. And I think faculty really relish those conversations. They know the history curriculum and sequence better than anybody else. And again, choosing this yourself, figuring out what those outcomes are. I think the outcomes matter almost more than the specific course. We have so many courses to choose from that I think more central is what the outcomes are and how they're assessed. That to me, and then we work to come up with those maps. And those are conversations that administrators, at least in my view, really should stay out of. I think it's our goal, though, to make sure that we're making progress, but stay out of the way.
Elizabeth, if I could, while we're on the issue of faculty engagement, one of the elephants in the room is the national movement to more adjunct part-time faculty, and which is largely to do with resources, but might be something else. I'm wondering, Davis, if you could address that question, because this is a problem not just in Oregon, not just at Lane, but nationally. And how are people dealing with the fact that so many of our faculty are not committed to one institution? They're committed to many in lots of cases.
this is the problem when you focus on the cost per student rather than the cost per completion. We had a whole chapter on this, and people believe you can string together MOOCs with coaches and actually get rid of teachers, like Western, University does. They have coaches. This is the model pursued, especially with people on the right, is something that you can do far more cheaply than this, system we have now. When you talk to students, they say it very differently. They say, we want a teacher. So this is the reality. But again, I think this is a matter of we don't communicate our value. Like that chart I showed for Lorain County Community College on dual enrollment and the cost difference. We're not advertising our value to the community. Communities love community colleges, but they know different pieces of it. But we're addressing a central piece of it, which is taking people and making them productive. We are great democratic institutions, and we haven't done a good job of speaking out, and the faculty have to take a lead on that. And I think it could potentially lead to, more, we wash out 40% of our students. We retain more of those students. We can hire more positions. This is what happens when the big challenge in Tennessee and these other areas where they've implemented the co-requisite, or what we call integrated supported scales, they've had to hire many more teachers. College level teachers. We were talking about 200 level courses in North Carolina. They're teaching many more 200 level courses, which, by the way, you can teach a lot of stuff under the learning outcomes of those. Forget about the title, because more students are getting to them. So this is fundamentally economically about, trying to get to more of a full-time model. But we know that people like to be engaged in this, and part-timers we're seeing across the country are and sometimes more engaged than the full-timers.
But I don't think we can ask them to do that for free. I mean, and so there has to be a way. Let's talk social justice. Yeah. We have to find a way to resource that, and that's our job. But there's also our lawmakers. We need them at the table as well. I mean, and if we were to look at a more fiscally conservative approach, I would assume in the red states and parts of all parts of the country, you're hearing frustration from lawmakers who are coming to understand that they're paying for the same course repeatedly.
That's right.
And I don't know if that's one way to get at this, but to help us resource more positions with full-time faculty, because we know that's better for them, it's better for students, it's better for the relationship and connection and learning outcomes. It's better for students and for faculty if we can, I think at PCC we are roughly 70% of our courses, I think, are covered by part-time faculty. We've made some progress. We are trying to change that. Am I hearing from my colleagues? It's 76% at PCC. And we know that's a lot of FTE, and we are making some progress in hiring more full-time positions, but it's a resource issue, it's social justice again, and if we can make the pitch to the legislators that it's better education when we can really cover these with more full-time folks who have more of their hours to devote to these kinds of initiatives. I think that's a strong one to make, because they're tired of paying for algebra in high school, algebra at community college. Two or three retakes. This
is exactly the argument I'm making. Pathways appeals to the right because it's return on investment and efficiency. It appeals to the left because it's social mobility and upward mobility, and both things are good. But we need to make the argument better, and that's part. Again, the maps aren't the end all, but showing people these maps, like showing a legislature a map like Lorain County is working on versus the alphabetical list that they have now is very compelling. Showing the legislature and the parent and the school board member their map about, because people don't realize you could get a BA for 30 grand versus 160, making the case, I think, is what I'm trying to talk about, and then arguing that we can't just have people running around, teaching these courses online part-time. We're building our community here.
May I just suggest
Sure.
That's a great way to engage part-time faculty. You made a pretty good argument there. I think we have one answer to the question right there.
That was a great segue, actually. Davis. And I know. And you touched on this earlier that, yes, the maps are not the silver bullet. We don't have a silver bullet. And actually, as Tinto would say too, that if we really want to see students succeed, we have to look at the classroom. The classroom has to be the place where we, especially for low-income students, that's where we need to make our focus. So if you can just make some remarks on that idea of, we have this broader pathways idea, and yet we need to focus on our classroom and what happens in our classrooms, and how do we balance that and make that cohesive. Next is world peace.
I can make an attempt here. Yeah, this is really the question, but it's so difficult because, I mean, I've talked a little bit about teaching excellence, faculty professional development, scholarship of teaching and learning that might support that excellence, but well, there are worries about autonomy. Here's one place to start. So let's say we had a sort of a top-down approach to faculty professional development, right? Well, I have a question here that comes from a colleague that I think is a good example of this. You know, this faculty member said, you know, I teach my discipline in one way, and my friends over here who teach the same discipline teach it in another way. We have different methods, we have different texts, we have wildly different ideologies, and we're not going to change. And we want that freedom, we value that freedom. So one question I've had is there a way to maintain that freedom and the kind of integrity that every faculty member has as an expert in their field, right? While still giving students the skills that they really need. I want to say I'm really optimistic because I think that there are ways to teach basic critical thinking and communication and critical reading skills through different kind of philosophical paradigms or ideological paradigms. I think there are ways to do that, but it would require a lot of help and training, right? It would require, and frankly, faculty would have to be open to that. They would have to be open to looking at the research on what works in education, on how we learn. They'd have to be open to learning about that. So.
I'll jump in here with just a little bit. So I do appreciate the autonomy. I do think that is critical for faculty. One of the things I think you can get faculty together on across, you know, not just within one particular college, but even from college to college and from community college to the four-year universities, is a set of outcomes that are agreed upon. You may teach it through some particular way, and you may teach it through a different particular way, but we all know the same outcome for this particular course. So that could be one way that everybody is like, okay, what do we want students to do? What do we want them to know? What do we want the outcomes to be? How can we measure it? You might teach it through this particular, topic, and I might teach it through a different, but as long as our students come away with that same particular outcome, then that is the same outcome that they want them to have when they transfer on to the four-year institution. So maybe getting our outcomes more aligned, making sure that one way that look at pathways could be, instead of our traditional, at least I'll speak for PCC, instead of our traditional gen ed model of 3 particular tracks, we could look at maybe it's outcomes based. And then the outcomes then allow for more integrative learning, and maybe one course satisfies 2 outcomes, or, there's lots of different ways to maybe start thinking about it, but it does require then faculty to start becoming engaged and thinking about it differently.
I just want to say I agree, first of all, but again, I want to push the point that if we were to focus on outcomes, we need to be so careful about making sure that we have shared conception, and that doesn't happen easily because there's so much room to interpret an idea differently, coming from a different perspective, right, and to engage in a kind of confirmation bias here. So it would be essential that we, not to, again, sound too much like a philosopher, but we need to define our terms very clearly before proceeding, right, lest we have a lot of confusion and get back into a kind of cafeteria model again through that confusion. So,
if I may, I think that part of it is also to return to rigor. We've moved mountains in DevEd. We've done great work in the community colleges across the country. But in this conversation, students do very, very well when they have high expectations that are clearly laid out. They rise to those, right? Thinking back to your own college, you don't remember easy faculty who just kind of let you have a free pass because they were worried that they might not get a contract the next term because they had too many DFWIs. I don't know what that model is in Oregon, but people are concerned, I think, a little bit about job security and grading. And I think in this, another role of leadership is to give faculty permission and a mandate to focus on rigor, achievement, learning, and high standards. Students can rise to them. Our colleges are full of very, very bright students. And for all of the time and effort we've spent on DevEd, that may have gotten ignored a little bit in the national conversation.
So speaking of DevEd, this is a question that I have particularly for you, Davis, if you wouldn't mind answering this one. Raise your hand if you've been involved with the DevEd work that's been going on. Okay, raise your hand if you are a college that has mandatory advising. Raise your hand if you're a college that has mandatory orientation. And I could go on and on. My question is, looking at guided pathways, how do we take all of the different pieces that the colleges have been doing, and how do we integrate them into guided pathways? Do we throw the baby out with the bathwater? What do we do to make a move to the guided pathways, and how do we start eating this elephant? What's some good first steps to actually make this happen?
Well, I disagree with Terry O'Banion and the folks from Cuyahoga, even though I know and expect them. I think that's way too pessimistic. We were not saying you need to throw this institution out. We talked about building. What's the next step after all the innovations that we've talked about here is tying them together. And I think the way to tie them together, to begin to tie them together, is to have these cross-silo disciplinary conversations on what it is students need to learn to be able to achieve the goals that we and they want for themselves, and to figure out with the limited resources we have how folks can, and to make some serious policy decisions that this is how it's going to be. If we're not going to allow a student to proceed in nursing, to keep banging their heads against the wall, but we are going to help them do this, and to talk about how to have those hard conversations. So I think the first step is to, start working on these maps, but make sure they're the framework for the conversations. And then how do we take our required advising? How do we take our orientation? How do we take our accelerated DevEd? One reason I think DevEd, the acceleration, despite the great results, hasn't scaled is because it's all been on the math and English and DevEd faculty. We need the science faculty to sanction, this is the math based on our needs, the universities that we need, and this is what we're going to teach. And by the way, we need to think about how to build in support not just into math, but into chemistry 101 and bio 101 and history 101. So, I think these conversations around the maps, as trivial as that may sound, the place to start is to put a draft down of a map and let's start talking about it. And how can we build on and take what we already have and make it work for students to help them get along that map?
Can I add to that? Starting with the end in mind. It's a puzzle or one of those mazes that our students need to get through, right? But starting at the end and designing from there. And we've talked a lot about instruction and not as much about student services and student development. But my guess is that those of you in student development who have been working on graduation, student success, DevEd, have focused a lot on the very early, first year experience, first year, first term, first week, when we know students are very vulnerable. But I would argue that it's also important to start at graduation, right? And then work backward. And it's both. Right? Mm-hmm. It's both beginning and end. But we've done a lot on the front loading of our student support services, and I think less on what happens. So maybe it's good, we're doing well. We have quarter to quarter and term to term or year to year retention, but then what? And how do we get students across that finish line? And again, the 4-year transfer partners are a huge, in this conversation, are huge in that as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's the questions that I had developed. So now we'll just open it up to the audience. So there'll be some microphones floating around. So just raise your hand and we'll get one to you.
I'm Kate Sullivan, and I'm from LCC, and have been nosy in a variety of statewide conversations. I hope that we can somehow do away with the horrible monster that's the AAOT. Because it flattens curriculum, it takes away the opportunity for scaffolding, and it treats all gen ed requirements as interchangeable, which means that we can't ask students to progress from 100 to a 200 level because there's no expectation if all the courses are the same. And it's a horrible degree that was put together by a committee. It's trying to do everything for everyone. And as Davis Jenkins keeps pointing out, we need to be helping students think in a disciplinary fashion. And that means earlier exposure to disciplinary ways of reading, writing, and thinking. And the AAOT does not address that in any fashion at all.
Do others agree?
I've got a question right here.
Oh. So I'm Rosa Lopez, and I'm from Lane, and I was also in the FIG. And one of the things I found interesting about that FIG is we had people from all over campus, and we all had our own piece of the puzzle that we were really excited about. There were people who were, yeah, let's make sure everybody engages with career development. And other people, okay, let's start the meta majors. And other people were at core learning outcomes. So we all saw a piece of it, and I really appreciate what Dr. Jenkins just said about it's really about putting those things all together. So it does start with the classroom, and we do have to have the rigor, and we do have to make sure that we have high quality instruction. But we also have to integrate the student services as part of that partnership and part of those professional development processes. And it really is about tying all those things together. And if we only focus on one, we're really missing the boat. So I just wanted to say that.
I talk too much, but you talk about faculty engagement. Every place where the faculty have been empowered, yet held accountable for doing this mapping, and where they've been given time and the meetings have been well facilitated and they followed through, the colleges followed through on what the faculty have created, it's always worked. The few cases where it hasn't worked is where it was rammed down their throats, like CUNY Pathways, for example. And Chicago's having issues with this, but that's another story. The real problem we're seeing and challenge, it's not the people, is advising, because it's such a fundamental redesign. So yes, faculty obviously have to be involved and engaged in this. It is not easy and it takes time. But if you don't involve the advisors from the start and other student services people, you're gonna have problems down the road. And we all have to go into this understanding that we are all part of advisors, whether we're formal advisors or not in this model. And we've got to work with those who are advising as team members to see that they're working for us, to get students ready to come to the classroom, ready for learning, and understanding why they're there. That's a heavy lift when you have very few resources.
So we have a question right here.
Hi, I'm Susan Lewis from Columbia Gorge Community College. And I was thinking about the continuum of education and sort of following up on something Lisa was talking about with transfer. And we're stuck in between two other entities that have a lot to do with this. And I wonder about how that connections are made in this. I'm thinking about high schools and transferring into us. There is work on building that high schools do more college classes while students are in high school to get their college going. I'm always really happy if they could just make it to us ready for college rather than being required to take 12 credits, 9 credits of college while they're still in high school. If they just come ready, I'd be really happy. And then transferring out on the other end to going to university, when we make maps and say, we might have a really strong connection with OSU because they have a really vibrant outreach program to try and get us to map to their school, but less so with U of O because they don't come around to Columbia Gorge the same way that OSU does. We actually have an OSU person on our campus who helps us map up to their college, but then it's different to U of O, it's different to OIT, it's different to here and there. We can come up with different maps, but doesn't that then again muddy the water into a big mess for students? So I'm wondering sort of these outside our control areas and how we deal with that.
Davis, do you want to?
Yeah, so I mean, the transfer, both things. The transfer, you guys have a lot of power, especially the regionals are hurting, especially in a place like Oregon where the demographics, you're not growing. This is a high tuition state. They need your students. And increasingly across the country, we're seeing flagship institutions understanding the value of community colleges. I mean, if they just rely on their incoming students, they won't have older students, they won't have students of color, and they're understanding the value to the education and to their missions. It's going to be most difficult with the flagships in many states, but I'm saying you guys have power with these folks, and you're in a high leverage position where you can start to have these conversations. And again, though, it's more like the adjunct faculty. Have we really gone and taken them our maps and said, you know, we want to help prepare students who are ready for you? On the other side, I strongly believe that the school reform, it's not the only thing that needs to be done, but it's not going to succeed unless we build these pathways down into the institutions. I think, and starting thinking at least in broad fields so that students can start explore. I was trying to argue that dual enrollment is one way that we're already in there that we could, and that actually has political power because middle class kids are more likely to be in those, that we could start shaping those because we're offering those those courses, which frankly aren't in program. We should dictate what they are and the terms on which students should participate. So I think those maps have to be, and that has a lot of power. Once that starts getting out, especially among those dual enrollment type middle class families, trust me, the word will get out.
The next question is over here.
You guys don't want to take this one?
Hi, I'm Elise Lamro, and I teach in the Adult Basic and Secondary Education Department here at Lane. And I want to read you guys an email I got this morning from a student while we're sitting here and see how you would answer it. So it says, "Hi, Elise. I was wanting to talk to you about dropping your class. The reason is I figured out that I can't work full-time and pay my mortgage and go to school full-time. Kevin did mention to me last night that I could apply for scholarships that might help with this. That being said, he also did mention the whole middle-aged white guy thing. It seems to be a hurdle. What insight do you have on this? And am I fooling myself with the idea that I could get a 2-year degree and make my house payment? Thank you."
Well, I'd say that our role is to make sure that that student gets a 2-year degree that really only takes 2 years and that really costs as little as it should. And we're doing, community colleges have been doing affordable education for a long, long time. But I think we need to make a better pitch that it's an excellent education with great teaching. And so in regard to that specific question, I think there are a lot of folks who are looking into the, Sarah Goldrick-Rabb's work on hunger, homelessness, and the challenges facing students in the community college context. It's groundbreaking stuff, and it's becoming part of the national conversation. So I hope that helps a little bit. It matters, and we need to get them through quickly, that they're only paying for each course once. Because otherwise, when students are starting college late, I can understand having a rather skeptical attitude about their economic future.
We have a question right here.
Hi, I'm Sarah Henson. I'm from Central Oregon Community College. And I wanted to actually tag on to a comment that was made earlier and ask a question of the panelists specifically. And that is, I'm fairly new to this as a statewide conversation, the guided pathways idea, but I too wonder about where are our partners, both in K-12 and in 4-year, on this conversation. I noticed in the show of hands there was only maybe 2 or 3 people from those partners. So I don't know if they were invited here. Are they having similar conversations? Are we all talking about this, or are we in silos about even this conversation?
Well, I can't speak to that exactly. I won't try to, but let me just talk about how we've started to try to have this conversation with Portland State, at least from Portland Community College's point of view. We obviously should start talking there because that is where the majority of our students do transfer. So we have started to take a look at, okay, well, when they do transfer, what are the top 10 majors that they transfer into? Like, let's start there. Where do most people do? And so we got a list of kind of their, how would you earn a bachelor's degree if you chose one of those top 10, and started looking at our maps and started to say, okay, if you were knowing that you wanted to do psychology, that is one of the ones, health, that's one of the ones, criminal justice was one of the ones. So we took a look at the top 10 and we said, okay, what are the few classes that are the same? What are the equivalencies? What could you take at Portland Community College that hits the majority of those 100, 200 level classes that then sets you up on the right path to be ready to enter into Portland State in that major and hopefully as a junior in that major. So we've started those conversations looking at just those top 10, because that's a good place to start, and looking at where do we have overlap? Where could we do this? So at least the conversation from that point of view has started. Granted, it's small and has a long way to go, but that's at least our approach of how we've started to look at that. Anyone else?
So in answer to the question, were our partners from K-12 and universities invited? The answer is yes. In multiple ways. So for Lane County, we have an organization called Connected Lane County that is the school districts, the ESD, the university, and Lane, and early learning. And so we invited them through that group. We invited the provosts through the CIA, Council for Instructional Administrators provost group. So we did reach out to them, and so we've got obviously more work to do in that regard.
I think we have a lot of history to overcome with that because we're used to having these conversations in our silos. There's work that's being done with the community colleges on placement, and as part of that, there's a work group that's mandated to have K-12 partners in it. And despite the best efforts, there was one person who showed up from K-12 to engage in that conversation. It's the same thing with our university partners. But I firmly believe that we have to start small like that we have to, I'm having lunch with one of the registrars. You just have to have these conversations. I want to talk with them about meta majors and about building these pathways and things, because if they're not on board, it's not going to work. And if we're placing our students in different ways and our K-12 instructors don't know about it, that's not going to work. So we absolutely have to open this up. But I think Davis hit it on the head, though. Overall, the community colleges, we need to do a better job of telling our story and of perhaps flexing our muscles with some of this and saying, no, really, you should listen. This is important. And continue to press that button until we can actually get them engaged in the conversation.
I've got the next question back here.
Yeah, thank you. Jim Salt, sociology instructor here at Lane. Two things. While I'm sympathetic to the advantages that better organizing and advising and so forth can have, and as has been discussed today, I've been studying the sociology of education, social mobility, relationship between educational success and so forth for 37 years and teaching about it. And I have to tell you, the excess of taking of particular courses, classes that don't help you move forward is way down the list in terms of what actually leads to or doesn't lead to student success. Poverty, life events, lack of academic preparation, funding for education. I could go on and on before I would get to this particular issue which is being focused on today. So let's not see this as a panacea. See this for what it can do, which is to help us move students more forward. But let's focus on the other issues and strategies to deal with them. One of the reasons why I'm particularly concerned about an excess of focus on this is because it can put too much emphasis on and create structures that undermine what is good about our educational system. Those of us who go into college with an idea of what we want to study, and then we find out that it really isn't us. And I'm a perfect example of that. I was an accounting major when I started, and I would have been a very unhappy and bad accountant because I wouldn't have been happy doing it. I happened to take a sociology class that would not have been on any of these pathways, and ended up getting a PhD in it and been quite successful at it. I would, judge, humbly myself, right? So please let us have a conversation about student success that is actually going to lead to student success and not some gimmick which is going to create unintended consequences. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. And at times, there, though, are programs that we've put in place that we put barriers in students' way. So I think that there really is some low-hanging fruit that we could to look at administratively, for instance. And when I was working in Washington, we had a lot of pressure and performance-based funding around students and their milestones, 15 credits, 30 credits, 45 credits. At first, we were given money when students hit each of those milestones, but later it was our money was taken and doled back out to us around those milestones. And then timely graduation. So it's a 90-credit associate's degree. However, the pre-engineering associate's degree was 107 credits. And I'm not suggesting that engineering is quick and easy and that you can do that necessarily in 2 years. However, we've put a policy and funding roadblock in our own way, in our students' way there, when we've designed a program that's basically a 2.5 or 3 year degree, and then our legislators are penalizing us if we haven't gotten students through it in 2. So I think that there really are some things that in the curriculum, faculty and leadership need to look at to just try to make sure that we've done all that we can on what we can control. But you're right, the contextual factors, homelessness and hunger and poverty that we've seen and again are really seeing a lot of spotlight on the national stage, those are significant roadblocks for our students.
Institutional change has to start somewhere. And we really have to start with the institutions we have, and those are informed by other institutions, of course. We can't deny that reality. However, I would make the case that one way to improve some of these realities you're talking about would be to ensure that we have an educated population, to make sure that we're helping our students to complete their degrees and get into careers where they can do the work they want to do. That's a way to help make the systemic change that would ameliorate those really deep causes that you're talking about. I think this is a really important place to start. And I have to, again, as a philosopher, I take issue with language. You use the word gimmick. I'm not sure if you meant to say that this model is a gimmick, but I think some people might hear about it and feel that way, so it's really important that that claim be made, right? And I wonder if those who first hear about the Pathways model sometimes come to it with misconceptions, because in the conversations I've had in the last few months about this model, they've almost always been prefaced with, well, I haven't read the book, but. Well, I don't know what guided pathways are, but here's my concern. So I think it's really, really important that we all educate ourselves. And one thing that stood out to me in reading this book and looking at Jenkins and his colleagues' research elsewhere as well, is that this model does seem to serve very, very well disenfranchised groups. And I think we need to pay attention to that. So.
Hi, Mady Rosengarten from Southwestern Oregon Community College. I just want to say I do think we all need to talk about equity a lot more. But my question is, I know that we're going to talk for 2 hours in the van on the way home about all of this and want to continue to talk about it, but we are kind of isolated and are small. Are there plans for more get-togethers? Is someone going to take the lead on helping us to collaborate with each other to continue to talk about this? And where can we get support? And will there be some from the HEC or whoever else, or perhaps from Columbia University, to help us keep this conversation going?
So there isn't a plan. There wasn't a plan. There could be a plan. A few years ago, Lane got a small grant from actually Cam Price, who had to leave. Current president of Blue Mountain Community College was the commissioner of community colleges. And on our way out the door, she gave us a grant to do regional collaborations. And so this is being funded. We've been parsing that money out over several years, and there's a little bit left. And if this was an issue that we wanted to have continued conversation about and bring people together, we or OCCA would be more than willing to do that. And we should also have a conversation with the HEC, because they should be supporting this kind of work. And Ben, I know Ben is sorry he can't be here, but we've got some staff from HEC. Donna, HEC, Donna's here.
Oh, I got it.
Oh. So my name's Donna Llewellyn. I'm the new Education Division Director for the Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development in the HEC. It's funny that you asked that question because I've already sent an email this morning saying, hey, we need to do something about this because of all of the connections of all of the things that fall under CCWD, career pathways, apprenticeship, high school partnerships, all of those types of things. So I don't know what that means yet, 7 weeks on the job, but please know that my brain lit up and there's a light bulb. So my hope is we'll be working with the OPC and OCCA and do something more. So thanks.
And I think along the same lines of what we've been doing for the past couple of years with the redesign, that's taking on a broader swath now, and it's looking more as student success and helping our students across the entire journey rather than just at one point in time. So absolutely, Mady, as Mary said, there isn't a plan currently, but there absolutely could be.